There's a sound a house makes when it knows something is wrong. I don't know how else to explain it. It's not a creak or a draft. It's more like a held breath. A stillness that sits just a little too heavy. I noticed it the night my husband, Walter, came home from his doctor's appointment and didn't say a word about what they told him. He just set his keys on the counter the way he always did, poured himself a glass of water, and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the yard we'd tended together for 31 years. I asked him how it went. He said, "Fine." Walter had never been a man of many words, but that night, fine was not the word I needed to hear, and somewhere in my chest, I already knew it. We built everything ourselves. That's not me being poetic, I mean that literally. Walter started his trucking company out of a one-car garage in 1987 with a second-hand flatbed and a handshake agreement with a lumber supplier 2 counties over. I kept the books on a yellow legal pad for the first 3 years. By the time our son Denton was in middle school, we had 14 trucks. By the time he graduated high school, we had 41. We weren't flashy people. We lived in the same house we'd bought when we first got married, just added onto it twice. Drove sensible cars, sent Denton to a good school and paid cash for it. What we had, we earned. I say that because it matters to what comes next. 3 weeks after that quiet night at the kitchen window, Walter sat me down at the dining room table, the same table where we'd signed our mortgage papers, celebrated every birthday, argued about every major decision for 3 decades, and he told me the truth. Stage 4. Pancreatic. The doctor had given him a timeline, and Walter had spent 3 weeks turning it over in his mind before he was willing to say it out loud to me. I didn't cry right away. I held his hand and I listened. That's what we did. We listened to each other. Even when the news was the kind that rearranges everything inside you, we listened first. But then he said something that surprised me. He said, "I need you to do something, and I need you to do it before the end of the month, before anyone else finds out." I looked at him. "I need you to take your name off the joint accounts," he said, "and open 2 new ones. Just yours. Transfer everything into them." I didn't understand. I told him so. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Denton's wife has been calling the company's attorney, asking questions she has no business asking." Her name was Suki. Denton had married her 6 years earlier in a ceremony we paid for, at a venue she chose with a guest list she controlled. I had smiled through all of it because she was my son's wife and I wanted to believe she loved him. I had tried. For 6 years I had tried. "What kind of questions?" I asked. Walter looked at me with the kind of tired that doesn't come from one bad night. "The kind that tells me she already knows I'm sick," he said. "Someone told her, and she's trying to understand what happens to the company when I go." I sat with that for a long time. "She's not entitled to anything," I said finally. "No," Walter said, "but she'll try anyway. And Denton will let her." That was the hardest part, not what Suki might do. We both knew who Suki was. The hard part was Walter saying out loud what we had both been unwilling to say for years, that our son, somewhere along the way, had become a man who let his wife lead him places he never would have gone on his own. I opened the accounts the following Tuesday. I transferred everything by Thursday. Walter watched me do it, sitting at the kitchen table with his reading glasses on, checking each confirmation number against a list he'd written out by hand. When it was done, he folded the paper, put it in an envelope, and wrote my name on the front. "Don't open it until you need to," he said. I put it in the back of my winter coat pocket, where I kept things I needed to remember but didn't want to look at. Walter died on a Sunday morning in March, 59 days after he told me he was sick. He went quietly, the way he had lived. I was holding his hand. The room smelled like the lavender soap I'd brought from home because he hated the smell of hospitals. He was 64 years old. I drove home by myself because I had asked everyone to leave me alone that morning. I sat in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. The house was just a house then, full of 31 years of life and completely, utterly silent. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in his chair by the window and watched the sun go down and come back up. Denton called the next morning. He said he was sorry. He said he loved me. He said he'd be over on Wednesday to go through some things together. I said, okay. I didn't think much of it at first. Going through things. That was normal. There was a lot to sort out. I told myself I was reading into the phrasing. Wednesday came. Denton arrived at 11 o'clock. Suki was with him, which I expected. But there was a third person, a man I didn't recognize carrying a leather folio, wearing a suit that was slightly too expensive for a house call. I stood at the door and I looked at my son. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Mom," he said, "this is Mr. Ferris. He's an attorney." I stepped back and let them in because what else do you do? Your son shows up at the door 2 days after his father's funeral and you let him in. You make coffee. You sit across the table from the man you raised and you try to find him somewhere in that face. Mr. Ferris put his folio on my dining room table and opened it like he owned the room. He said he was there on behalf of certain interested parties regarding the estate of Walter. I held up my hand. "My husband has been gone for 48 hours, I said. He paused. "I understand this is a difficult time. Do you?" I said. "Because I haven't even picked out the flowers for his service yet." Suki reached across the table and touched Denton's arm in that particular way she had. The way that was a signal and a command at the same time. Denton straightened. "Mom, we just need to understand what's happening with the company, what the transition plan looks like. Dad would have wanted everything to be clear." I looked at my son for a long moment. Walter had worked himself half to death and then the rest of the way, building something for this family. Denton had grown up watching it, had spent 2 summers working in the dispatch office before deciding it wasn't for him, which was fine. We never pushed him. He'd gone into real estate, done well enough. We were proud of him. But somewhere in the last 6 years, well enough had started to look smaller next to what Walter had built. And I think that's when the math changed in Denton's mind. Or in Suki's mind first, and then in his. "Your father had a plan?" I said. "You'll hear about it when the time is appropriate." "We'd like to hear about it now," Suki said. She had a particular way of speaking, very level, very controlled, like every word had been rehearsed. I had always found it unsettling. Now I found it something else entirely. I stood up. "I'd like you all to leave," I said. Mr. Ferris looked uncomfortable. Denton looked at Suki. Suki looked at me. "Mom, you brought a lawyer to my house," I said, 2 days after your father died, without calling me, without asking. You sat in his chair at this table and you brought him in with a folio." I kept my voice steady. I had learned a long time ago that the steadier your voice, the more it lands. "Get out of my house," I said. "All 3 of you." They left. I stood in the kitchen until I heard the car pull out of the driveway. Then I went to my coat closet, reached into the pocket of my winter coat, and took out the envelope Walter had given me. I sat down and opened it. His handwriting. Neat and small, the way it always was. The letter explained everything. Not just the accounts. He'd already walked me through those. But the rest. The company structure, which he had quietly reorganized 18 months earlier with a different attorney, one that Suki had never had occasion to contact. The majority ownership, which was now solely in my name, structured as a transfer completed before his death, fully documented, fully legal. The minority share, 20%, that had been set aside in a trust for Denton, accessible at 55, non-transferable to a spouse. At the bottom of the letter, in a different ink, like he'd added it later, he'd written, "I'm sorry I didn't say this sooner. I saw it coming for a long time. I just didn't want it to be true." I folded the letter and held it for a while. Then I called our family attorney, our real one, Elaine, who had known us for 20 years, and I told her everything. What followed was not quick, and it was not easy, but it was thorough. Mr. Ferris, it turned out, had been retained by Suki directly, not by Denton, not jointly but by Suki alone, using a credit card in her name. He had been retained 6 weeks before Walter died. 6 weeks, which meant she had known, or suspected enough to prepare. When Elaine uncovered this through the billing records, which Mr. Ferris had not been careful about, it opened a different kind of question. How had Suki known about Walter's condition before the family had been told? Who had given her that information? The answer came from an unexpected place. There was a woman who had worked as an administrative assistant at Walter's doctor's office for 11 years. Her name was, and this is the part that still makes me close my eyes when I think about it, her name was a woman Denton had dated briefly in college, years before he met Suki. a connection so old and so thin that nobody thought to look for it. Suki had found her, had maintained a relationship with her quietly over the years, and when Walter's diagnosis came through, that woman had made a phone call she should never have made. She lost her job. She faced a licensing board review. She is no longer working in healthcare. Suki was served with papers related to the unauthorized disclosure of protected medical information. There were civil proceedings. There was, eventually, a settlement that I am not permitted to discuss in specific terms, but which I will say was significant enough that Suki could not simply walk away from it. And Denton, my son. He sat across from me in Elaine's office on a Tuesday afternoon in May, 7 weeks after his father's funeral, and for the first time since all of this began, Suki was not in the room. She had her own attorney by then. Their interests, Elaine had made clear, were no longer the same. He looked like he hadn't slept in a long time. He looked, honestly, like his father. The tired version. The version Walter got when something was weighing on him that he hadn't yet found the words for. I didn't speak first. I waited. He said, I didn't know about the doctor's office. I believed him. That was the hard part. I believed him. But you knew she had hired Ferris, I said. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. You let her, I said. You knew what she was doing, and you let her bring that man to my house 2 days after your father died, and you sat there and you let her speak. He put his face in his hands. I had rehearsed this moment. I had imagined myself saying things, hard things, true things, the kind of things you think of at 3 a.m. when the grief and the anger take turns with you and neither one lets you rest. I had a whole speech prepared, but sitting there looking at my son, I found I didn't want to give it. What I felt, more than the anger, was something closer to grief. A different kind layered on top of the first. The grief of watching someone you love become less than who they were. The grief of knowing that you can raise a person with everything you have and still lose them to the wrong choices and the wrong company. I said, your father loved you. He left you a share of everything he built. He made sure you were taken care of, and you sat in that room. Denton didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, I know. The company is still mine. I run it now with a management team Walter had helped me choose in those last months. He'd been thinking ahead even then, making sure I wouldn't be alone in it. We have 63 trucks now. I go into the office 3 days a week. I know every driver's name. Denton and Suki divorced 8 months after Walter's death. He called me the night it was finalized. We talked for a long time. We are not all the way back to where we were. I don't know if we ever will be entirely, but we talk now. Honestly, that's more than I had hoped for in those dark weeks when I sat in Walter's chair and watched the sun come up. I still wear my winter coat. The pocket is empty now, but I keep the coat. There's something I've learned from all of this that I didn't expect to learn. It's not about money, though money was what they were after. It's not even about greed, though greed was certainly there. It's about this: the people who love you, really love you, prepare for you. Even when they're tired, even when they're scared, even when preparing means sitting at a kitchen table with reading glasses on, checking account numbers on a handwritten list, making sure that when they're gone, you'll be standing on solid ground. Walter knew what was coming. He couldn't stop it. But he could make sure that everything he had built, everything we had built together, landed somewhere safe. It landed here. With me. And I intend to take care of it. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. Not just the legal side of it, the paperwork, the accounts, the settlement, but the deeper question underneath all of it. How does a family end up in a room like that? How does a son sit across from his grieving mother with a lawyer's folio on the table and tell himself that's acceptable? I don't think Denton was born that way. I raised him. I know who he was before. What I've come to understand is that we make choices, small ones, over and over, and each one either builds something in us or quietly takes something away. Denton made a series of small choices: to look the other way, to stay quiet when he should have spoken, to let someone else steer him. And those choices accumulated into the person who stood at my door 2 days after his father's funeral. That's not fate. That's not punishment handed down from somewhere above. That's just how it works. You act, and the acting shapes you, and eventually you become what your choices have been making you all along. Walter understood this. That's what I keep coming back to. In those last months, exhausted and sick and scared in ways he never admitted out loud, he still made the harder choice every single time. He could have ignored what he suspected about Suki. He could have told himself it probably wouldn't matter, that Denton wouldn't really let things go that far. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table with his reading glasses on, and he did the work. He protected me not out of suspicion or bitterness, out of love that was also wise. That combination is rarer than people think. I've thought about what it means to be genuinely intelligent, not book smart, not successful in the way the world measures it, but actually clear-eyed. Walter had it. He could see people as they were without needing them to be different in order to love them. He saw what Suki was. He saw what Denton had allowed himself to become, and he loved his son anyway. You could see it in how he structured that trust, making sure Denton couldn't be cut off entirely, making sure there was still something waiting for him at 55 if he found his way back to himself. That kind of intelligence isn't cold, it's the opposite. It takes real courage to look clearly at something painful and still respond with care instead of cruelty. As for me, I won't pretend the last year has been easy. There are mornings when I still reach for Walter before I remember. There are days when I look across the room at his empty chair and the grief is as fresh as the first week. That doesn't go away. I don't think it's supposed to, but I also know that I'm still standing, that the company is still running, that 63 drivers show up to work every morning because Walter built something real and I have kept it real. There is a kind of strength that you don't know you have until you absolutely have to find it. I found it. I'm still finding it. Denton called last week. We talked about nothing important, the weather, a restaurant he'd tried, a memory of his father from when he was young. It was a small conversation, but it was honest, and right now honest is enough.